I'm standing on a frozen wasteland in the middle of Greenland, staring at a hole we just drilled through 250 feet of solid ice. My team told me there was something down there, something that shouldn't exist anymore. When I finally descended into that darkness and saw what was waiting for me, frozen in time, I realized we'd just opened a door that had been sealed shut for half a century. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I do. I'm part of a specialized recovery team that locates and extracts lost aircraft from impossible places. We've pulled wreckage from mountains, swamps, and ocean floors. But nothing prepared me for this. In 1992, we got a signal. Ground-penetrating radar picked up a massive metallic signature buried deep under the Greenland ice sheet. The coordinates matched something from old military records, something from 1942, a squadron of American fighters that vanished during World War II. For 50 years, people assumed they were gone forever, crushed, scattered, lost to history. They were wrong. Let me take you back to July 15th, 1942. The world was burning. World War II was at its peak, and America was desperately trying to move planes and supplies to Europe to support the fight against Nazi Germany. A squadron of 6 P-38 Lightning fighters and 2 B-17 bombers took off from Maine, heading for Iceland as part of Operation Bolero. These weren't just any planes. The P-38 Lightning was one of the most advanced fighters America had. Twin engines, sleek design, fast and deadly. The pilots flying them were skilled, confident, and ready for war. But Greenland had other plans. Somewhere over the ice sheet, the weather turned violent. Blinding snow, zero visibility, winds that could rip a plane apart. The squadron lost their bearings. Fuel was running low. They had two choices: try to make it through the storm and risk crashing into a mountain, or find a place to land on the ice and hope for rescue. They chose to land. All 8 planes managed to touch down on the glacier without killing anyone. It was a miracle. The crews survived. They were rescued about a week later. But the planes, they had to leave them behind. Military command made the call. The aircraft were stuck in the middle of nowhere, and it would cost too much to recover them. So they abandoned them, left them sitting on the ice. That should have been the end of the story. But it wasn't. Because Greenland doesn't just sit still. The ice moves. It compresses. It swallows everything on its surface and drags it down, layer by layer, year after year. Those planes didn't stay where they landed. They sank. Slowly, quietly. The snow kept falling. The ice kept building. And within a few years, the squadron was completely buried, gone from sight, lost to the frozen deep. For decades, nobody thought about those planes. There were bigger wars to fight, newer technology to build. The men who flew those missions grew old. Some of them never talked about that day. It was just another close call in a war full of close calls. But there were a few people who couldn't let it go. Aviation historians, researchers, guys like the ones who eventually formed our team. They started asking questions. If those planes landed intact, and if the ice preserved them, could they still be down there? And if they were, could we find them? That's where I came in. In the late 1980s, our team started studying glaciology reports and old military documents. We learned that the Greenland ice sheet moves about 3 to 6 feet per year. We did the math. If the planes landed in 1942 and the ice kept piling up at a steady rate, they'd be somewhere between 200 and 300 feet below the surface by the 1990s. That's deeper than most buildings are tall, and we'd have to pinpoint their exact location across thousands of square miles of blank white nothing. We used ground-penetrating radar. It's a device that sends electromagnetic pulses into the ice and measures what bounces back. Metal reflects differently than ice. If there was a plane down there, the radar would pick it up. We spent weeks dragging equipment across the glacier in sub-zero temperatures. Every day felt like a gamble. We were burning money, time, and energy chasing ghosts. Then one afternoon, the radar screamed. I remember the guy operating the machine just stopped walking. He stared at the screen. Then he called us over. There it was, a solid return signal, big, metallic, sitting 250 feet below our boots. We marked the spot and drilled a test hole. When we pulled up the core sample, we found traces of aluminum and aviation fuel. We had it. We had one of the P-38s. But finding it was one thing. Getting to it was something else entirely. You can't just dig through 250 feet of ice with shovels. Ice that deep is under massive pressure. It's hard as concrete. We needed a plan. So we designed something that had never been done before. We built a thermal device that could melt through the ice using heated water. Essentially, we'd create a shaft straight down to the plane. It took months to set up. We had to pump thousands of gallons of water, heat it to near boiling, and blast it into the ice. Slowly, we carved a tunnel wide enough for a person to fit through. The day we finally broke through to the plane, I volunteered to go down first. They lowered me in a harness with a headlamp and a radio. The walls of the shaft glowed blue, ancient ice, compressed over decades. I could see layers in it, like rings in a tree. Each one represented a year of snowfall, a timeline frozen in place. The deeper I went, the colder it got. My breath came out in clouds. The light from the surface disappeared. It was just me and the ice. And then I saw it. At first, it didn't look real. It looked like a sculpture, a metal ghost trapped in a tomb of ice. The nose of the P-38 was pointing slightly downward, and the twin tail booms stretched back into the frozen darkness. The entire plane was encased in crystal clear ice. I could see every rivet, every panel line. The paint was still visible, faded, but there. Markings from the United States Army Air Forces. This thing had been built in a factory in California, flown across the country, loaded onto a ship or flown overseas, and then it ended up here, buried alive. I floated there for a moment, just staring. My team was shouting in my ear, asking what I saw, but I couldn't answer right away. I was looking at history, untouched, perfectly preserved, frozen in the exact moment it was abandoned. I moved closer. The cockpit canopy was frosted over, but I could see inside. The control stick was still in place. The instrument panel was intact. Dials, switches, gauges, everything right where the pilot left it. I saw a pair of gloves on the seat, a map case, personal items, stuff that belonged to a man who'd climbed out of this plane 50 years ago and walked away, thinking he'd never see it again. It hit me then. This wasn't just a machine. It was a time capsule, a snapshot of a moment in the war. The pilot who flew this plane went home. He lived his life. Maybe he had kids, grandkids. Maybe he told them stories about the day he had to land on a glacier in the middle of a storm, and the whole time, his plane was down here, waiting. We spent the next several months carefully excavating the aircraft. We melted the ice around it section by section. It was delicate work. One wrong move and we could damage something that had survived half a century in perfect condition. We disassembled the plane piece by piece, wings, fuselage, engines. Everything was labeled, photographed, and brought to the surface. When we finally pulled the last section out of the ice and laid it on the glacier, the whole team just stood there in silence. We'd done it. We'd brought Glacier Girl back from the dead. That P-38, the one we called Glacier Girl, was eventually transported back to the United States. A restoration team spent years rebuilding her. They replaced damaged parts, restored the engines, and repainted her in original World War II colors. And in 2002, 10 years after we pulled her out of the ice, she flew again. I watched that flight. I stood on the tarmac and heard those twin engines roar to life, and I thought about the pilot who landed her on that glacier in 1942. He never thought he'd see her again. None of them did. But we gave her back. The discovery of Glacier Girl proved something important. It proved that history doesn't just disappear. It's out there, buried, hidden, waiting for someone to care enough to go looking. That squadron of planes isn't just a footnote in a war that ended decades ago. It's a reminder that the people who fought in that war were real. They made impossible choices. They survived impossible situations. And sometimes the machines they left behind survived too. Since we recovered Glacier Girl, other teams have gone back to Greenland. They've located more planes from that same squadron. The work continues. Every plane we bring back tells another piece of the story, another chapter that was frozen in time. I've been on a lot of recovery since then. I've pulled wreckage from jungles and deserts. I've dove into lakes and rivers chasing rumors of lost aircraft. But nothing has ever felt like that moment when I first saw Glacier Girl through the ice. That feeling of reaching through time and touching something that shouldn't still exist. It changed the way I see my job. I'm not just recovering metal. I'm recovering memory. I'm bringing back pieces of history that people thought were gone forever. And as long as there are planes still out there, still buried, still waiting, I'll keep looking, because they deserve to be found. What do you think is still out there, frozen under the ice, waiting to be discovered? Subscribe if you want more stories like this.